Here at Plugged In, we spend a lot of time thinking about, well, some really not very nice things in our culture. And we do that in part to warn you off from them. But the fact of the matter is, there's always been stuff in pop culture that tries to raise the bar or maybe lower it when it comes to being bad. And sometimes we might need to think just a bit more about not only avoiding that kind of content, but understanding why it might appeal, especially to our kids, even if we've said no, or maybe especially when we've said no. Hey everyone, Adam Holz here, your host of the Plugged In Show, focused on the family's weekly conversation about entertainment, pop culture, and technology. Thanks so much for joining us today. Well, by now you might be wondering what kind of bad content we're talking about. Well, this week we're going to touch on two really pretty nasty shows that might have a kind of perverse appeal, especially among teens. They're Exploding Kittens and Sausage Party Foodtopia, reviewed by Kennedy Unthank and Paul Acey, respectively. They're both animated series. The shows, that is, not Kennedy
not
and
us.
Paul.
Not us.
And
Not yet.
No, that might tempt us to wonder, how bad could they really be? Well, we'll answer that question, and we'll dive into a deeper conversation about what I might call the allure of the transgressive. More on that fun topic in just a minute. And in our second segment, we'll give you a break with something about as far from exploding kittens as you can get. It's a new movie called My Penguin Friend, and Bob Hoose has seen it. He'll join us to talk about it and maybe just restore our faith in humanity a tiny bit, or at least restore our faith in penguins after we, deal with the mess left by exploding kittens.
Everyone loves penguins.
Everybody loves penguins. Well, before we dive into today's show, I want to say thanks for joining us each week as we talk about all sorts of things. I think we're going to have an interesting conversation today. Our goal each week is to equip you with the information you need to make the best decisions possible for your family and to help your family grow in terms of thinking about worldview and thinking about how ideas and images affect us. And if you've been blessed by the Plugged In Show, there are 3 ways that you can help us bring more episodes your way in the future. First, tell your friends. Second, leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. And third, we would invite you to make a donation to the show. And you can do that today with the donate link at the top of our podcast page, thepluggedinshow.com. And all of these ways of supporting us would mean a lot. Thanks. Well, without further ado, let's get started. Joining me for our first segment, as you've already probably figured out, are Kennedy Unthank, Paul Acey, and Jonathan McKee. Hey, guys.
Hello.
Hey.
So today we're going to be talking about entertainment that has problems beyond the pale. Let's turn the camera lens a half degree, and ask this parallel question. And this might be the most fun icebreaker I think I have ever come up with. What's the worst movie you've ever seen, and why? And I'm genuinely interested in your responses. And Paul, you said before we started recording, you have 4 to choose from. So, I mean, maybe
probably more than that, really.
We can pick one, and then we'll see if there's time left for your other 3.
Oh my goodness. So I think I'm going to go with a movie that I just saw this year.
Wow.
In a Violent Nature.
Ooh.
Man, oh man. Talk about beyond the pale. Everybody is very pale because all their blood has been drained out of them, pretty much.
Well, that would do it.
Yeah, it was a very intense slasher movie. It got a lot of great reviews because it did some interesting things with the genre. There was no soundtrack. The weirdest thing was that the entire movie was done from pretty much the perspective of the actual killer.
Oh, so sort of a sympathy for the devil kind of approach.
Man, I'm not sure about that, but it was really, really creepy. And man, there were some incredibly violent scenes.
So you're talking worst content-wise.
I'm talking about worst content-wise. Now, people who have listened to this podcast know that I have a soft spot in my heart for really terrible movies quality-wise.
Right.
So I couldn't really go there. I have a lot of movies on that docket, too.
Well, and when we talk about worst movies, there's sort of like, it's like descending into the Marianas Trench, right? You go through these different thermocline layers where they're so bad it's good.
Oh, yeah.
Amazing.
Right? And then there's just the abject frozen darkness of things that are so purely bad. They're so bad you don't even want to watch them because, well, they're just terrible.
Yeah.
And mine is Battlefield Earth.
Oh, I've seen that.
Oh, my word. That's a bad movie.
Wow, the entire movie feels like it's tilted.
Yeah, among other things. I mean, I'm just like, it was so bad. How bad was it? I wanted those 2 hours back, and I want to warn people, it's not even worth watching because it's deliciously bad.
See, but you talking about it makes me want to watch
bad.
it again.
No, okay, maybe later.
See, I think that segues pretty easily into my non-choice.
Okay.
Deliciously bad Moonfall. You and I saw that together.
Moonfall's really terrible, but fun terrible.
So Moonfall, you can guess the plot based on the name. The Moon Falls.
And actually, that's as much as you need to know about this movie.
And it's one of those movies where it's so bad that it's funny, even though they didn't intend it to be funny, which is why it's not my worst movie.
Yeah.
Because at least it was funny.
Right.
The worst movie I've ever seen is probably Morbius.
Oh, Morbius.
Wow.
Morbius was just, I wanted to leave the theater. And I was looking at my watch, like, how much longer do we have? And it basically stars this scientist who has a degenerative blood disease. And so he's trying to cure it by using these vampire bats. And he figures, well, if I inject myself with some of their DNA kind of stuff, then maybe that'll cure the disease. I don't understand fully the jump there. But it works, except that it actually gives
Not in the plot, but in the movie.
Yeah. It gives him these superpowers that are bat qualities. But however, he also realizes, oh, I need to drink blood. And if I don't drink blood, I go like feral. And the movie ends exactly where it started, where he's thinking, oh, eventually I'm going to have to drink human blood because this synthetic blood I've been developing isn't going to stave it off forever. So something's going to happen. And at the end of the movie, he's like, oh well. You know? and it's so frustrating. But I think one last thing I'll say on it, because I despise this movie.
It's funny how you want to talk about
line.
the movies that you really hate and the movies you really love. You want to talk a lot about.
My favorite line in all of Morbius is he develops this thing, because of course there's a villain who has the same powers as him. And he develops this kind of anticoagulant, I guess, that will cause the guy to die if he injects it into him. And he clarifies what he means because he says, to bats, it's lethal. To humans, it's deadly. And I was sitting there and I'm like,
now I want to see Morbius too.
that means the same thing. I don't know why you're clarifying that.
It was a good use of his thesaurus, though.
Right, exactly.
Oh, that's awesome.
I'm going to go cue that one up right now.
I actually, whenever you hear a description like that, it makes me want to watch the movie.
Totally.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
That's so sad. Oh, my goodness. Oh, that's hilarious. Okay, well, I have a feeling that you guys are going to pick up rocks and throw them at me when I share what movie. I'll just quickly mention that one of the movies that I hated as a kid, and granted I was only 9 years old, but I had high expectations because I used to all the time, my brother and I, we loved watching Star Trek on TV. And then all of a sudden, this movie came out called Star Trek, the motion picture.
Yep.
And okay, as an adult, maybe I might view it differently,
No, you
but I
wouldn't.
will forever see it as a 9-year-old. Bored out of my stinking mind.
You're like, what does V'ger mean? And when is something going to happen that
we
matters?
made jokes. We would literally
Ashley's
be like,
nodding her head in the studio.
Oh,
You know-
we would be like, oh, I need to go to sleep. I can't sleep. Let me watch the V'ger story.
It was the weirdest film choices ever in that movie. 2/3 of it is just watching what they're watching. Like they are clearly.
So it's like
really-
Mystery Science Theater.
It's
Only
Oh,
not
it so
nearly
needs
as
to
good.
be Mystery Science Theater.
Totally.
I don't understand it, but that was the one as a child, or I think as an adult, the one that really got me. I don't know. I don't get super offended easily, but that movie that Simon Pegg and Nick Frost did.
Oh, yeah.
Paul.
Yeah.
Sorry, Paul. That's what it was called.
No, I totally hear that. I reviewed
About the
that movie.
alien. And it's interesting because, I mean, those guys did Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz, kind of creative stuff, but you could tell that there's some little anti-God elements and stuff like that. But boy, Paul was like, I mean, in short, this alien supposedly is so much smarter than us. And so throughout the movie, the alien's all, well, didn't you guys realize yet that? And he just bashes on God, bashes on anything that you believed in that was sacred. I mean, it was relentless, and it was really hard. I mean, I actually was in the theater, and I remember, and people are laughing, and it like almost brought me to tears because it was bashing what's sacred, and like it really offended me.
Yeah,
it just
So
anyway,
and just
it's tough to watch.
To reemphasize what you're saying, Jonathan, when I walked out of the theater, I was also kind of upset with that movie. It really went some places. But yeah, and to be honest with you, I think the logic of it didn't even work. Like if you think about it in any depth whatsoever, their theses that they were presenting just didn't fly.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a good segue into our bigger conversation about really bad content and what its appeal is, because I think there's something kind of paradoxical about it. And the images and the ideas that we take in can influence us. They can shape our perspective of reality. We're going to circle back and talk about that, especially with regard to Exploding Kittens here in just a minute. But I wanted to start with a little bit of a confession, and this is a little bit on the edgy side, but bear with me. In my teen years, I was definitely not walking with Jesus, even though I was going to church every week. And when I was around 14, maybe 15, right in there, my best friend and I would go to our local video store, and we would often go kind of on a perverse mission. We wanted to find the nastiest movies in every genre that we possibly could. And that was often, those were horror movies. I mean, that's, they're tailor-made for 15-year-old boys. And that was combined with the nastiest movies that the employee on duty would actually rent to us. And so there were some adults.
Did he actually say, no, you can't rent this?
No, there were. When the adults were on duty, we knew that, it wasn't going to be anything beyond PG. Yeah. But then we had a couple friends that had graduated a year or two before, and they would rent us anything. And thankfully there was no X-rated stuff, but there was some really, really hard R material. And we're like, oh, that looks horrible. We should get that. And I saw Clockwork Orange when I was 14.
Goodness.
And it remains one of the most searingly horrible things that I have ever seen on film. And it was designed that way. That was the intention. But when you're 14, you don't have the bandwidth to process something like that. But I say all this because I want to talk about, to start today, the allure of the transgressive. What do you think it is about extreme content that often appeals to adolescents, especially, even though it's at least theoretically intended for older audiences?
It's a great question. And I think part of it is that transgressive nature. When you are a teen, you're looking for ways to separate yourself from your parents. You're looking for ways to explore outside the safe bounds that you've had for so long. And so you seek excitement elsewhere, right? The home environment is safe. You know it really well. You know that you're going to be able to go back to it if you need to, but you want to explore the dark and dangerous world outside. And for a lot of kids, I think that is found not necessarily on the city streets as much as it is in the movies. So you've got that. But I also think that there's something about humor, especially, where it is hooked into the unexpected. Yeah. Right? A lot of these horror movies can be really incredibly violent and gory, but oftentimes these movies are meant to be funny too. Yeah. Because it can be just so shocking that you don't quite know how to react to it, and so you laugh. And that makes you think, that is funny. I want to see more of that. We had one of those experiences. I hadn't thought about this until you brought it up, but I remember when my best friend and I saw Return of the Living Dead. And by now, the zombie thing had morphed into
just dark comedy. And we just laughed and laughed and laughed at the horrible things that happened to both the humans and the zombies, right?
Yeah.
So other thoughts, guys, about why we are drawn to the transgressive. Jonathan?
I think that, to just tack on to what Paul was saying, I think there's kind of this, as we hit adolescence, we're vying for independence. We're kind of explore, who we are and what we are. And part of that is, I've been told don't do this. Is that really true?
Right.
And so,
Did
so
God
a lot
really
of us are
say?
Exactly. And it is kind of an exploring and discovering for ourselves. One of the things I find the most fascinating about that is I definitely had questions in my own life about sex and about certain subjects that I felt like were unanswered because we don't talk about these things.
Right.
And the crazy thing about a lot of sin, and sin is literally us kind of doing things our own way instead of the way we're created to do it. I mean, God made this amazing plan, and God's amazing plan included sex, which is this amazing thing, that's meant for two people to enjoy during marriage. But, hey, well, why not enjoy it a little more than it was created? Why not enjoy it with everybody instead of just within marriage? And so it's a perversion of something good.
Yep.
The sad thing is, I feel like we live in a world that still, in some circles of believers, we don't want to explain the why and talk about the good. We're afraid to talk to our 14-year-old. And so the 14-year-old ventures out and explores for themselves. The danger is that what you described, Adam, that world doesn't exist anymore. There is no video store clerk anymore. Now there's you just hit stream and it's there. You just search, it's there in the phone that's in your bedroom. And that's what's a little scary is now as we're vying for independence, if we have curiosity, if mom and dad, and I mean, just be honest, I did a parent workshop last weekend. I had 8 books for sale. And one of the books is Talking to Your Kids About Sex. I sold out of every book and had a stack of the Talking to Your Kids About Sex because every parent goes up and like, oh, we already had that conversation.
That's really interesting. And you're absolutely right, Jonathan. One of the things that I thought of when I was reviewing Sausage Party Foodtopia is that it is accessible to any teen whose parents don't really know how to operate the parental controls. It can be available on their phone, and you
on their
see,
friend's phone.
On their friend's phone.
On their
That's
friend's
exactly
phone.
right. And because it is animated, it makes it look light and humorous, and maybe a lot of parents would say, there's no problem with
It's
this.
just hot dogs.
It's
How
Seth
bad could it be?
Rogen.
It's just a cartoon.
It's Kristen Wiig. How bad can it be? It's really bad, and it goes into Jonathan.
Paul, why don't you tell us about Sausage Party Foodtopia, and then we'll get into Exploding Kittens.
It goes into exactly what you were talking about, Jonathan, where the movie feels like it was made for a 15-year-old's personality, their sense of humor, with this extreme adult content. Now, it's all animated, but you can see just this preoccupation with sex. It's done in this humorous way where it's a bunch of foodstuffs doing all these things, but it really does hit at that transgressive nature of humor and adult humor especially.
Kennedy, how do you think Exploding Kittens sort of enters the chat, if we can say it that way?
Yeah, well, honestly, when I first saw kind of the idea for this podcast, I was wondering, well, how does Sausage Party mix in with Exploding Kittens? They kind of come at 2 different angles, whereas Sausage Party is kind of just salacious humor for the sake of it.
Yeah.
Exploding Kittens, I will say, was probably a bit easier to watch than Sausage Party in terms of content, but it's the themes that it's exploring in that content that can come across as objectionable. Basically, it's got this idea of God, and it does explicitly mention it's the Christian God, although he looks a lot more like how you'd imagine like Zeus to look. And his board of directors in heaven is upset with him because he's kind of turned a bit lazy over time. He's kind of become a very deistic view of God. And they say, hey, how about you show us that you actually still care by going down and answering a prayer? And so he goes down, and they turn him into a cat so that he can kind of blend in.
They turn God into a cat.
Yes. And they say, hey, you're not allowed to use any of your magic. You're not allowed to do any of this. You have to help this family. They want their family to kind of get back together and rekindle all these cracks that have happened over time, and you're going to have to infiltrate them and fix it. And so a lot of the objectionable stuff comes from this really blasphemous stuff on exploring Christianity, which I do think comes from a culture that is getting more and more relaxed and not viewing anything as holy or sacred anymore. There was a time when people were like, no, you don't joke about that. That's serious. That's holy, whether or not you believed in it or not. But I think we're at a point now where people just think, oh, nothing matters. And so we can just make fun of anything.
Well, and I think that it speaks to the desensitization that we have experienced culture-wide, that it used to be you could create a sex comedy that was transgressive, but they've kind of done everything, right? There's not much left to do. And so to even find something that's transgressive, you almost have to go in that spiritual direction because there's nothing left on the table.
It's kind of like the content version of what I talked about a while ago on Marvel and its issue with power creep, where I had mentioned in the Marvel movies, just over time, the stakes keep getting higher and higher and higher because, well, if the superheroes keep getting better, they have to get higher.
Right.
But eventually you reach a point where it's like, okay, well, now it just feels, everyone's threatening the universe every week now. And sometimes that's how it feels like with content. Where people are, someone says one swear word and everyone's like, whoa, someone used a swear word in a movie. And now it's just 8,000 F words in a Tyler Perry movie and no one bats an eye anymore.
Right.
And you see this kind of, this somewhat race to the top of
Or the
content
bottom.
issues. Yeah. And you kind of see this race of like, well, who's going to do the next objectionable thing?
Yeah. And one of the interesting things about how we deal with media, right? The thing that strikes me about when we're talking about some of these worldview issues, when we're talking about using religion as sort of the next transgressive thing to deal with, that is not really counted on the MPA ratings, right? You're not going to get an R rating for anti-Christian content.
Right.
These are things that you have to be really aware of what is in a movie to understand that this might be something you do not want your kids to see, you don't want yourself to see.
I couldn't help as Kennedy was talking about like that show, and and I always jump on like Internet Movie Database and like I'll read some of the descriptions of what's going on, and one of the things that just popped out at me coming from this parent workshop last weekend is Exploding Kittens is rated TV 14.
Yeah.
So I got all these parents to come and go, well, what parental controls should I use and this and that, and one thing I say, and it's not a popular thing to say, is I say, please don't just rely on parental controls, simply because you can set all the parental controls you want and your friends, they could go to their friend's phone. We talked about that earlier. But here's one where, TV 14 should be safe, right?
Right.
And we've got to have conversations with our kids. And one of the last things I shared with this group of parents this last weekend is don't be so focused on pointing out the lies that you forget to talk about truth. Because one of the best things that we can do is having regular, frequent conversations, making a regular part of our experience of growing up with our kids, to be discipling our kids, and whether that's dad taking your son out for breakfast once a week and going through a book with them, or whether it's reading together at night. If you're a house that says, hey, let's shut off the screens at 8 and we all read, maybe you make it fun to read a book together. Maybe you're reading Chronicles of Narnia, and maybe every once in a while you read some family devotions together. Being able to have those conversations and establish that foundation of truth gives them the perspective to be able to recognize the lies when they see them, because they're going to see them.
Yep.
The parental controls aren't going to always be there.
Yeah, and I really like, Jonathan, what you're saying about with explaining the why, because, especially nowadays, maybe you could get away with it some like 40 or 50 years ago, but the truth is we don't live in a culture anymore that respects Christianity as much as it used to. And so you can't get away with just saying, oh, well, you can't do that because it's wrong. You have to explain why. Now, if you want your kid to actually follow your train of thought and not the internet's train of thought or the culture's train of thought, then you need to actually explain these why issues.
Well, and Kennedy, I can't help but just jump on what you're saying, because think about this, because our whole goal is to raise our kids so that when they're 18 and they're in an army barracks, or they're in a college dorm, or they're living with their roommates, they're going to be making those decisions of, do I watch this next HBO show?
Right.
And guess what? They're going to call you up and say, hey, Mom, can I watch this show? They're out on their own. They're making those decisions for themselves. The only thing that's governing them is the why behind it. So hopefully you've had plenty of those why conversations so they can access the truth that they know, because truth is what's going to help them make decisions, because they know not just what's right or wrong, but what's even beneficial. What has natural consequences. They've maybe lived some of that, experienced that, and they've had those conversations. So absolutely encore on what you're saying, Kennedy.
Yeah, and I think that's our goal at Plugged In and with the Plugged In show, is to be a resource that not only tells you, hey, this X, Y, or Z show has X, Y, or Z content, that's going to be a no-go, right? We want to help you have the information you need to know, yeah, our family's not going to watch that. But we hope that as you listen to the Plugged In show, that bigger sense of discipleship in terms of entertainment and technology is in play. And discipleship is about, as you just said, Jonathan, it's about that ongoing conversation. It's about the why. It's about understanding the appeal. And so maybe instead of just saying, Plugged In said that has a bunch of stuff in it and it looks like junk, we're not going to watch that. Say, and I'm talking when your kids are 14, 15, 16, developmentally appropriate, saying, well, what is it about that is appealing to you? Why would we want to step into that? And so we're engaging them with critical thinking as opposed to just saying, no, we're not going to watch that.
Yeah, and I do think that one of the things that we are trying to do at Plugged In is encourage everybody to think more deeply about what they engage with, right? I think about the grids that we have in our movie reviews, right? We break them out very thoroughly. We have violent content. We have, profane language. We have all these things to make it easy for parents to really look through our reviews and say, okay, this is what I'm really concerned about. What does Plugged In say about the number of profanities used or whatnot?
Right.
And that's really good. I mean, I think that stuff is incredibly important. But if I was going to judge what's more important, it's probably a section that a lot of people don't even look at very much. And that would be the spiritual content section.
Yeah.
Because that is, when you talk about profanity, when you talk about violence, when you talk about some of these things, yes, they can affect your children. But nothing can affect your child more than some of the worldview issues, some of the spiritual issues that they're seeing in some of these really, really effective movies. You need to pay attention to the big picture.
And ultimately, even if you really want to think about the logical extremes, that spiritual worldview, it ultimately bleeds down into those other content sections.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So when those other content sections are happening, it's as a result of that spiritual worldview.
I love that. And I hope that as you've listened today, that even if you don't have kids that are like, mommy, can I watch Exploding Kittens, right? and maybe that's not where you're at. I hope that as we have talked about some of these, transgressively alluring things and why we're drawn to bad things, I hope there have been touch points for you and your family. And as always, we want to encourage you to be intentional, to be engaged, to be developing your relationship with your kids so that you can talk about this stuff when it comes up. Because as Jonathan says, even if we do everything right as parents in our homes, they have friends that are going to have wide open access to all this stuff. And so we want to equip them. We want to teach them. We want to disciple them. So again, as Jonathan says, when they're 18, when they're in an army barracks, when they're off to college, my 17-year-old is leaving for college in a week. And I realized, man, this is where we're at. And we want to equip you and be that resource for you as you listen to the Plugged In show. So thanks, guys. Well, in our second segment today, Bob Hoose joins us to tell us about a new film called My Penguin Friend. And unlike, say, Deadpool and Wolverine, I would guess there's a reasonably good chance that it's not on people's radar. And so one of the things we want to do at the Plugged In show is really to highlight the good stuff out there so that there is actually some good stuff that may be worth considering. So
right.
I don't want to steal any more of your thunder, Bob. Tell us about My Penguin Friend.
Well, first of all, it's live action.
Okay.
Because they may think from the title that it's an animated film, and it's not. It's live action, and it's a story of this fisherman on a little tiny island off Brazil. And actually, in his past, when he was a younger man, his son was killed in an accident, and he blames himself for it. And it's one of those incidents in his life that literally upended everything. And it changed his relationship with his wife, changed his relationship with all of the other people who lived in the little fishing village. And he just became something of a broken man. And then one day, years and years and years later, he finds this little penguin floating in the waters off his little island world.
Which penguins don't usually show up in Brazil.
No, and that's the thing. And it's covered in oil, and he decides he's going to rescue this animal, and he takes it home, and he cleans it off.
Why is a penguin in our home?
He needs our help.
What?
Yes. He was covered in oil and barely alive.
That's why the oil over my kitchen.
Yes.
The penguin cannot stay.
And his wife keeps saying, okay, now you can get rid of it. You can send it away. And he says, one more day, a couple more days, another week. And next thing you know, this little penguin has been in their family for like a month. And finally, at some point, the little penguin is healthy enough that on its own, it waddles back into the ocean and disappears. But
Is that the end of the story,
no,
Bob?
that's not.
But wait, there's more.
Yes. Then each year, when the whole flock of penguins, I think it's a flock. Do you call penguins a flock? Anyway.
I don't know,
when the
but
whole
I like
group
the idea of
the
it.
whole group of penguins migrate, this little penguin decides to migrate back to that little island off the coast of Brazil.
So he goes to see his friend.
Yes, they become his family. And so it's really all about that. There's more that goes on here, but that's essentially the story. It's a really sweet story.
Is it based on a true story?
It is. It's based on reality.
Wow.
In fact, it was a big news story at one point because somebody found out about it and thought, what? Why is this penguin coming down to Brazil?
Yeah.
You know? And it became this big news story that was quite popular. And in fact, you can probably find it on YouTube somewhere.
On the interwebs, such as they are.
That's right. But anyway, it's a really nice story. It's not a film that's like Lawrence of Arabia epic or
Right.
anything like that, but it is one of those sweet stories that you can have the whole family watch. There's really no content here in terms of something nasty where you think, oh man, I don't want to see that.
It's not Old Yeller.
No, yeah, that's
Penguin
right.
doesn't die in
There's
the end.
nothing of that nature at all. And I won't tell you how it all ends, but it's very sweet, heartwarming. It's one of those things where you can step away. Kids who love animals will step away and say, you know what? I always knew animals were like that.
I love that. You know, it reminds me of a movie that I reviewed a long time ago. I'll bet it was close to 20 years ago, called Duma, about a boy and his cheetah. And the dad dies, and they were in the process of taking their cheetah cub that they had raised back to the wilderness. So it's a very similar kind of idea.
very
And I
similar.
think animal movies give us something. You know, they touch our hearts in a way that maybe some other genres don't. And thankfully, most of the movies in this genre are not, you know, R-rated slash fest, but they're these tender relationships,
Well,
right?
and it sort of illustrates that natural sense of goodness that we hope to find in the world.
Yeah.
We don't often find that. In fact, we often find just the opposite.
Yeah.
But sometimes there are things that connect us. It's really very much like God created something that can continually remind us of his goodness.
Yeah. Well, and I think I was even thinking about the spiritual connections too. My guess is the movie doesn't, because I haven't seen it, doesn't connect these dots, but you know, our first mandate in Genesis was to care for creation.
Right.
You know, and so even from the beginning, there is an idea that we have a relationship with the rest of the created order. And so I think movies like this, perhaps unintentionally, they touch on the beauty and the wonder and the inherent goodness. Like I think caring for a wounded animal, this is going to sound weird. There's something almost godlike about that, right? That we're taking care of that which can't take care of itself. And I think really at least in a small way, fulfilling that charge to be good stewards of creation.
And even on the very simplest level, it's nice to find entertainment that's sweet.
Yeah, man, because as we've seen elsewhere in this week's show, not everything out there is sweet. So I hope as you're listening today, we talked about Sausage Party, Foodtopia, and exploding kittens and other not so nice things. There is some good stuff out there. And honestly, if we want more of it, the way to get that is to support it by watching a film like this. So, Bob, thanks for telling us about My Penguin Friend.
My pleasure.
Well, now it's time for a part of our show we call Pop Culture Connection, wherein we are joined by our producer, Ashley. Hey, Ashley.
Hey, Adam.
And she asks us questions related to pop culture, and we have to give as many answers as possible. And I know that this is a segment that causes stress and anxiety for some members of our team, but I think it's one of my favorite things that we do.
Yeah,
So
I like it. Especially, Jonathan is always so terrible at this game.
I know.
That's right. And I love when Paul gives one very deep answer instead of lots of light answers.
And Jonathan gives us 16.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, take it away.
All right. So we've been doing kind of a this or that edition
Yeah.
the last few times. And so we're going to continue with that. So, Kennedy,
Yes.
I've asked this of other people. I don't
Okay.
think I've heard your answer, though. Star Wars or Lord of the Rings, and why?
Lord of the Rings, because it is explicitly a Christian allegory, unconsciously at first, but then consciously, as Tolkien himself says. You have a lot of characters who represent Christ figures, including Frodo, Gandalf, not Tolkien, Frodo, Gandalf, Aragorn, even a couple others who I won't get into. The Silmarillion is kind of the cool version of the Lord of the Rings. The Hobbit's like the children's version. You have the satanic figures like Sauron and Morgoth, and
That's the
Yeah.
first time I've ever
Nice.
heard the Silmarillion is referred to as the cool version.
well, it's
Oh
the
my
version if you really
goodness.
want to say you're a fan. But
Oh, yeah.
it's
And
the
if you're-
gatekeeping
It's
version.
sort of like the hipster,
Yeah.
It's way too cool for
And
me.
it's just fun to say. I mean,
Yeah.
what is a Silmarillion? Kennedy? No,
it's
not now.
one
not-
of one of 3 gemstones.
That is another podcast. It's a
Wow.
3-part podcast by Kennedy.
7 points, Kennedy.
Nice.
Good job. Good job.
I mean, I think Silmarillion has so many syllables, maybe we give him a bonus point.
sure.
No, we don't
No?
get bonus points
I
here.
mean, Star Wars, it's easy
Come
to say.
on, man.
Silmarillion. It's like 30
Wow.
seconds right there.
All right. Paul,
Oh,
you're going to love this one.
all right.
More than one answer, Paul. More than one answer.
X-Files or Twilight Zone, why?
Oh my goodness, what a good question. I'm going to go Twilight Zone because it has so many different themes in it. It's black and white. I love black and white stuff. All of the 23-year-old men always look like they're 50. I think that's pretty interesting. It was an age where people wear hats. They would walk around everything. You never knew what you were going to get with Twilight Zone. You would flick on the TV and you never knew whether it was going to be going into the past or whether there were going to be spirits running around or evil children.
Oh, yes.
Rod Serling.
Yeah.
Serling.
And
That's
Rod
true,
Serling.
too.
And William Shatner on a plane. Mm-hmm. I love the X-Files, but I did have to go Twilight Zone on that.
Nice. I got 9 points for you.
Nice.
Good job.
Oh, my
that,
goodness.
Good job.
All right, I guess
Even
I'll
if-
just leave.
Even if you had your bonus point, I still would be ahead of
Can
you.
I have it then?
Yes, you can
That was a
have it.
little more than one, Paul. That was good.
All right, Adam.
Let's do it.
Alien or Predator, why?
Oh, Alien. Alien is the absolute template for the modern sci-fi horror movie. You've got an alien, a xenomorph with a mouth within a mouth. You've got one exploding out of somebody's chest, which is not really great by plugged-in standards, but it really worked in the movies. I mean, you've got, what's her name? Sigourney Weaver. There's a cat. There's a cat. Come on. And
That's a negative.
and it's sort of like Jaws in that you don't see the alien that much because you didn't have the budget for it. And what you don't see is scarier than what
See,
you see.
I was thinking that the question was going to be who would win. You know?
No, Alien wins.
Wasn't that a movie?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
Alien versus Predator
Right.
is a movie, yes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
a comic book
When it
series.
shouldn't have
and
been made, yeah.
Yeah.
Lots of other things.
Nice. 8 points.
And if we would have gone Predator, I would have said, if it bleeds, we can kill it. But we didn't, so I can't say that.
Exactly.
Oh, I got
Even
it in.
though you just
I got it
did.
in.
Wow. All right, Jonathan.
How many points did I get?
8.
8.
8
Okay.
points, yeah.
You said that.
Man,
and I missed
I
it.
just
Kind of
got to
in
tell you
between.
that this bar is very high today. I have very low expectations of myself.
I need you to reach deep
Jonathan,
into
is-
your movie.
Jonathan, is your connection going? Is it going?
I don't know. I can hear
No.
myself very
No,
well.
I was just being hopeful. That's all.
Oh,
I
you're trying to
see.
win.
Got
I
it.
see.
Oh, Paul was being funny. By the way, I like your hats. Your hats answer, Paul, had me.
Yes, the
you had,
hats.
you had me at
That
hats.
was my favorite part of your
You had
answer.
me at hats.
Indeed.
Okay.
All right, Jonathan, I need you to reach deep into your movie well and tell us, do you prefer James Cameron or Christopher Nolan and why?
Absolutely James Cameron. I mean,
Yeah.
ever since with Terminator, where he just did something he'd never done before. But Abyss, which isn't even talked about, one of the greatest stories
Right.
ever with the lamest ending.
Yeah.
T2, he flipped the script, even though Schwarzenegger demanded something of him. Titanic, okay, I saw it twice on opening day. That's 6 hours of Cameron. I heard he's not a nice guy, but the guy can direct films. And I love his love for the ocean. He brings it into most of his films. He's creative. He is great storyteller, good effects, and I didn't touch anybody else, but hey, it was okay.
Nice. I got 9 points, so you and Paul are tied.
You know, I was real confused for a second when he was talking about the Abyss. Because I thought he said with the Les Mis ending. And I'm like, what does that mean? And I was trying to figure that out
Les
for a
Mis.
while. And I was like, oh, Lamus.
Yeah, the Abyss. I always tell people it probably would be one of my favorite films ever. But I say it's like 2 hours and 20 minutes. I say watch it sometime when you only have 2 hours to watch a movie, and say I'll get to the end of it later, and then never do, and you'll love the film.
The Abyss is really good. How many times have you seen Titanic?
Oh, I can't count.
Oh,
Wow, that's
a
a lot.
lot.
I've seen it twice.
I saw it once. It was enough for me.
Well, and the second time was for Plugged In. So, yeah. I
It's
would
not
have
my
only
favorite
seen it once.
Cameron. It's not my favorite James Cameron at all. But I am always surprised how good it is. Everything, honestly, it's like when I get to the Jack and Rose parts, I almost like hit fast forward, and then I just like the rest of the stuff. Anyway.
Once
Yeah.
the ship starts
Well,
sinking, I'm all in.
Go
But
to
after
Owl
that-
Kitty on YouTube where they replace Rose with a cat, and it's a better movie. So there you go.
Oh, my.
All right. Well, on that note, we will bring our multifaceted conversations in for a landing today. Thanks for joining our conversation today. I'm curious if you have a teen that likes to live on the edge when it comes to entertainment. How have you responded? We would love to hear your story, and here's how you can tell us about it. If you go to thepluggedinshow.com, you can leave us a voicemail with your answer to that question, and we might just include a snippet of that on a future show, or reach out to us at team@thepluggedinshow.com, and you can send us an email as well. And of course, you can always find us on Facebook and Instagram. But wait, there's more. You can also leave a review for us wherever you get your podcasts. And as I mentioned earlier, that's a great way to help our show grow because it helps people know what to expect, when they sit down or go for a drive or go for a run and put our voices, on for the Plugged In Show. And we got a review from Frank recently on Apple Podcasts, and he writes, "Thank you for doing this podcast. I really loved the most recent episode about the Olympics and the Deadpool movie. Great information, helpful perspectives, and fun humor in your show. Frank, I especially like that you like our humor. So that warms my heart. Can't wait for the next episode. So here we are, and you are a part of it." So thanks, Frank, for leaving that review for us. Finally, if you haven't done so yet, we would love it if you picked up a copy of our team's new book, Becoming a Screen Savvy Family. And we're going to make it easy for you to do that. Today, for a gift of any amount, we will send you a copy of the book. And I like to think of it as it's the Plugged In Show in book form, right? The kind of conversations we have here on the show are similar to the ones that we have in the book. And we want to help you and your family navigate this crazy realm of pop culture and entertainment and
a little
technology.
more one-sided,
Right. I mean, I guess there's not really a conversation per se.
But still, I get your point.
Us to you, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So we would love to send you a copy, and you can find information on how to do that in the episode notes for today's show. Well, thanks again for spending some time with us at the Plugged In Show this week. We know that you have lots of ways that you could spend your time. We're thankful and honored that you have chosen to spend some of that time with us, and we look forward to another conversation next week on the Plugged In Show.
It's time to level up. Give your kids a safe, faith-focused, and biblically based community, and so much more. Join the Adventures in Odyssey Club. Club members get on-demand access to the exciting Adventures in Odyssey series, including more than 900 episodes. With faith-building activities, parental controls, and a safe online community, the Adventures in Odyssey Club could be your best adventure yet. Learn more and start your free trial at adventuresinodyssey.com/radio.